Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host, Jim Gurley. And I feel like a broken record. I keep talking about how good our pre-games are, Jim, but it was another good one, and we were all as well aligned again. It's like we're in each other's brains. I think it's all the practice that we've put in, all the reps, as you like to say it. But we came up today with the topic that's on our wheel of worldview, and we've also been talking about our worldview in the context of it being part of one's belief system. And Jim does this exercise with a lot of his topics where he does the 5 W's: what, why, who, when, where. And he did a little of that work sometime in the past. And I want to briefly read what you did, Jim, so it gives context to our discussion, because we could take this discussion a lot of different directions. It's pretty rich.
Yeah.
So,
Hey, Mark, before you do that too, you mentioned context. What it seems to inspire our topics every week is, of course, our framework, right? This is one of our 5 areas of our lives, but also what's going on in the world. And I think anybody that's been alive the last few days knows that there's riots and there's tension in the world, or at least in our
yes.
country.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, if you could share also the context, what's inspired the topic for today.
I mean, it's politics. It's the tension in the country with regard to, in specific, the immigration issue. But we both believe there's way more to it than just that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what's one of the funniest things that we say, and you say it more than I do, but we don't want this to be about politics. I'm like, yeah, it's not. It's very difficult to not bring politics into some of the stuff. And I think because we're talking about
your quote was, and it stays true. This is a couple years ago. You're like, Jim, it always is about politics, and
yeah.
I wanted to disagree with you, but it's true. Ultimately, it becomes about politics, as in policy and decisions. But eventually, that becomes your worldview, and then what we're going to talk about today is a belief system
Mm-hmm.
that overrides everything. Because I think as humans, we're trying to maintain a narrative or a position, and we don't like to be challenged with it. And so, yeah, I'll let you read the definition of this, but it sets things in place to have, I think, healthy conversations about one's different opinions about issues, but really their belief system.
Yeah, how do you see the world? I mean, the purpose of a belief system, as you've got written here, is to guide someone's values, actions, and worldview. It's how we make sense of the world and our place in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good luck with that, huh? So
I guess what we're going to try to do, right?
yeah, we're going to give this a shot, folks. So
Yeah.
the what is belief system, worldview, ideology, way of thinking, conscious and subconscious, and perspective. The why is it's an important part of self-awareness. Why is it important to be self-aware about your own belief system and unconscious bias? I think that just allows you to move forward in the world with
But
a
the
little bit
unconscious
more
bias
ease.
is important, right? Because to be aware that we have those, that's part of.
A lot of this. You throw self-awareness and self-reflection on top of your belief system. I think that's a really healthy combination. And I think that one is probably better off doing that consistently throughout one's lifetime, as opposed to just once or twice in a lifetime.
Yeah.
Everyone has a belief system. And it's an interesting point you make. Some people are very aware of their belief system, and some people, I think, drive blind and don't even pay attention to their belief system. It's more subconscious or unconscious than conscious. When is, this is the coolest part about the conversation. It's formed over our lifetime by experience, our childhood, our religion, what we do for a living, the media and their noise, our education, and what type of education, as well as where we got that education, and past experience. And then the where ties right into the wheel. I mean, our worldview, and we'll probably prove this point to some extent in this episode. Where does it affect you? Well, your profession, your worldview, your mental and physical health, your relationships with people, and your relationship with money. So that's good work. I'm glad you found that document. You did that a while back. But, I think the other context, Jim, is not just the politics, but the recent conversations with people with whom we disagree, and or don't agree on everything with, and the interesting way those conversations evolved. And the beauty to me was, at least in your position with the two people that you were talking about, you disagreed and got along quite well. It was not a typical what you see on the media where people that disagree are arguing and yelling at each other and then walk off the stage.
Mhm.
That's not what took place in your conversations, which I think was really cool.
Yeah. And context to those conversations throughout this past week was relationships with people I've had decades. So there was a foundation of trust and a common belief system to some
Hmm.
degree, right? Especially with my friend that I spent the day with. Even though politically he we may start off in two different places, uh, ultimately we want the exact same thing, and that's the better good of people, and so our value systems are very aligned. Maybe how we get there is different, and that's a healthy conversation.
I think, and again, I don't have any data to back this up, but just my own personal experience, because I've
Mhm,
talked to a lot of people that I don't agree with and people that I do agree with. I think most of us want the same stuff.
mhm,
And
mhm,
there's a lot of noise and performative action that people take, whether it's for attention or control or for money.
mhm,
At the end of the day, and I think those two conversations might just prove my point. You start out
mhm,
over here and you end up finding out that, you know what? We're both humans. You
mhm,
know,
mhm.
we're both humans.
What I learned, because these two individuals, again, in respect to their privacy, I don't want to share too much about them, but one is a woman that is quite a bit younger that had a childhood in the East Coast with very, and we talk about this in our worldview, right? Her childhood in relation to her heritage and even her religion is very different than mine. Um,
Hmm.
although her childhood was grew up in a, I'd imagine, because they're a nice part of New Jersey, so that's her worldview.
Hmm.
Um, so it's just fascinating to really get an understanding of where that comes from. And again,
Hmm.
we have a good enough relationships where we can laugh at each other and with humor about our different backgrounds, because my
Hmm.
background is very different, not just the time but the place. But ultimately, yeah, her intentions and her is nothing but sincere and wants to do good. But how she gets there is completely different. So some of
Yeah,
the words
that's.
that, and this goes back to vocabulary, right? The words that she uses to describe her position, the words that I use are very different. But
Yep.
what is also the thing is, she is just as passionate about the outcome as I am.
Hmm.
So typically you wouldn't even have an interaction with something like this because you would find yourself so far apart. But then ultimately you agree. So
There's a lot of good messaging in there. There's a
mhm,
lot of good messaging in there. And I think, and I've said this to you many times, when I go out in the world, everyone's nice to me, you
mhm,
know? And I
mhm.
even told you one time I had a Trump shirt on, and the only thing I got were compliments. I didn't get a lot of them,
Well,
but
you got that's what you saw. There was other people that weren't giving you compliments. They were giving
yeah,
you
and I don't, and you
but
know what? I don't give a shit about
I
that.
know that's what's great. That's what's great about you. I love that. That's kind of where I was saying, it was the backhanded compliment, but a true compliment was, um, if somebody has that much conviction and that much passion for their issue, I don't care how much I disagree with it. I value it, and they're not going to pull back because they got pushed in something or they heard something, and they're going to stay true unless you can demonstrate to them that it's that you're worthy of, let's say, modifying their worldview or their belief system. And so
Yeah, yeah,
I've
I
learned
think.
to celebrate that. Not That's not a conflict. Like dig in. Even to the point where I would ask her questions, or him, because it was two different people, 2 different days, because I really wanted to hear from them with the unedited, right,
Yep,
unfiltered,
yep,
why they feel that way. And
yep.
sometimes you'd be surprised. You do change your belief system. It gets modified. That's probably more are more accurate than if you didn't have that conversation. And
Well, I
so,
think if you take a word,
yeah.
the name of a group, for instance,
Hmm.
and you don't bring context with the word, then
Yep.
it's open to interpretation, right?
Yep.
It's just, but if
Context is huge. Yeah.
once you bring context, which is exactly what those two conversations were, they were
Hmm.
contextual, right? Like,
Yep.
where are you coming from? Well, let me explain to you where I'm coming from. Let me explain to you why I said that or why I'm thinking that. And
Yeah.
I think those are when you can find people like that, you can make progress. And even if they walk away with they're still in the same place with a worldview, you've
Yep.
also built trust, you've
Yep.
built your reputation, and you've built your relationship more deeply, and it resolves a lot of things. And at the end of the day, I don't think our human nature is to be in specific groups. I think our human nature is to be human, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah, I agree.
So, you
So,
know, that one of the things that I wanted to, before I forget, like in terms of the stories behind worldview, I was just thinking about this the other day because I was going to write about this topic, and I still may. When I was in my early 20s, and had most of my worldview probably in place by then, or I thought I did. I won a sales contest, bunch of sales contests in a row. And one of the things we did is you go into a room with everybody that qualified and you talk about, well, where should we go on this long weekend? It was a plane flight and it was a Friday morning to Sunday evening thing. So skiing was an option, the beach was an option. But I stood up one time and I said, why don't we go to Amsterdam? And everyone looked at me like I had two heads. Like, why the fuck would we go to Amsterdam? I'm like, have you ever been to Amsterdam?
mhm.
I said, it's a $350 round trip flight. It doesn't take that long.
Who are you talking to? I missed the
I'm talking
context of
to a
this.
group of salespeople in my company that qualified for a sales contest, and this was the reward,
Oh,
was a
oh, I
trip
see. And then you get to decide where you want to go, and you
as a
brought that up.
collective group. So these are all A personality, big
Got it.
money
Okay.
makers,
Yeah.
salespeople.
Got it. I'm good
But
here.
my
Yeah.
point from a worldview standpoint was it dawned on me I'm the son of an airline pilot. I got on
Yeah.
airplanes when I was a kid, right? And
Yeah.
I went to other countries when I was a kid. Most
Hmm.
people don't,
Yeah.
right? And so, and I have experienced in my life, and this is one of the things I tell young people when I tell them they shouldn't go to college unless they fit into a particular bucket.
Hmm.
You got to get outside your own backyard, man, because there's a whole world out there. And to your point, you meet somebody from New Jersey who's of a different religion and a different gender and brought up in a different world, and you get to talk to her. You don't have to
Hmm.
travel to her because she's in close proximity, but you're
Hmm.
essentially bringing another entire culture into the conversation. That's what you get when you travel to go to other places. And what I
Yeah.
found in my lifetime is I can tell almost immediately whether I'm talking to someone who's done any traveling or not. So I
Yeah.
think my worldview, and I suspect yours as well from your rugby and other traveling,
Hmm.
is different than it would have been if you stayed in Southern
Yeah.
California
There's
for
no
your time.
question. If you, again, if you've left the country and you understand other cultures, you have a different worldview. If that the that this is not the only place where people um, have good ideas that are smart, and there's a lot of history to it. But there's something I want to share with you. This is a quote. I used to use it often. I haven't recently, but it's one of my favorite quotes. And I'm sure I've modified it or stole it from somebody, but it goes like this: You can't kill a thought.
Mm-hmm.
It must die of old age or natural causes. So let's break this down because
Mm-hmm.
when I say you can't kill a thought, this was a four-star general that I heard speak. This is years ago, and his son actually was a friend, and there's an acquaintance. So there was this conference, and he asked his father to speak to this group, and I was in the audience. So you probably know what a four-star general is more than I do, but he was sharing his experiences being a four-star general at the time. I think he was Obama may have been the administration he was in, and he was talk about every morning he would start his day, reading all these documents and everything, and then he would have to make decisions. But it was really more the role of the U.S. government around the world. There was four areas, and his responsibility was one of those. And his point was that the U.S. is not really interested in conflicts. What our a lot of the work that the military does is avoid conflicts, and
Mm-hmm.
and in order to do that, Sometimes instead of dropping a bomb on a certain area, they'll build a water facility treatment plant, or they'll do things that allow the economy and the world to get better. And I thought
Yep.
that was kind of cool. As that's what our
Yep.
tax lawyers do, right? It's not just about building bombs.
Mm-hmm.
But he said the greatest threat in the world today is 18 to 23-year-old men with no hope.
Mm-hmm.
Makes complete sense, even in our country, right? 18 to 23-year-old males with no hope. No
Yep.
hope. Why? Because maybe one country cut off the water, so their families are starving, and it causes war. There's all kinds of things. Gets very
Yep.
complicated quickly.
Yep.
Um, and then I remember saying that you can't kill a thought. It has to. So what that is also saying is that if you have one group that has been, say, really had a bad experience by another group, they will die hating the other group, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what's happening in Israel. It happens all over the world with Palestine, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you can never remove that thought. If you saw your mother or daughter be murdered or raped, all those things, right? That's a thought that is deep in your belief system.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say it must die of old ages, that generation has to completely die. Just die, grow old and die. And natural causes is something like a war,
Mm-hmm.
or the natural causes. It faded out. I think this, we talked about this before too. I think this movement of this progressivism and this kind of left wing leadership in the past administration, that's a natural cause. It's starting to fade out a little bit. It doesn't mean that people have completely changed their belief systems, but it's not as prominent as it was. That's my addition of that. And then I went on to, is again, it could have been a couple different things I've just reassembled. Was we kill our leaders, be worth being killed. And it's I think a Martin Luther King one, or one of those,
Mm.
somebody like that. But that's so true too. If you really are passionate about an issue and you're going to put yourself out there, uh, that's just what we do as humans. We kill our leaders, and whether it's, I'm not saying we physically kill them. We'll try to destroy them in any way we can. So the word kill is not always a death, as a physical death, but you're attacked. If you put yourself out there, then eventually they're going to come after you. And that's just what we do. This has been going on for thousands of years, as long as there's been humans.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, it goes on. It goes on in small places like on LinkedIn and social media. It goes on everywhere,
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think the thing about social media that we've talked, I mean, if you're getting your worldview from social media, you should start over, right? So it's
Yeah.
yeah, no, I think back to mine, and I've said this a couple of times on different episodes, but one of the things about worldview that I like to kind of emphasize is
Mhm.
the nuance, the context of it, because
Mhm.
I like to say, I'm a old white Catholic, conservative, Irish male. And you know what else that tells you about me? Not a fucking thing. Right.
Mhm.
We gotta dance. We gotta talk. We gotta add some context to that, because if you presume you know someone because of a couple of groups they may or may not
Mhm.
be in, or that they like a particular person that you don't like, you got to dig a lot deeper to find out who that person is. So you have to want to do that. But
Mhm.
I think we communicate pretty lazy with regard to context sometimes.
Mhm. Well, let's break down the worldview, because that's again one of the five areas. The other areas, of course, your profession, your relationship with money, your relationship with others, your well-being. That's your physical, mental health. But it all ties back to our worldview in one way or the other, of how we project that on everything we do and the people we interact with. And the way that we did this, we broke it up into two subcategories, and that's one, your childhood. So this is what I've learned, right? Your lived experiences shape your worldview, and if you
Hmm.
don't go revisit them, or at least really understand where they came from, then that's going to be really good, or it's the unconscious bias that you're projecting on everybody that you come in contact with.
Well, and you've told some stories, and I've told some
Yeah.
stories in previous episodes about some of the trauma
Sure,
and
trauma is a big part of that.
hardship.
Yeah. Yeah.
You do. I think you got to go back and look at some of that stuff. Otherwise, you'll stay stuck wherever you are.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. People, I think that when you can disagree with other people, that's when you discover new things and perhaps maybe modify your worldview. with
Yeah.
information you previously didn't have or
Yeah, Mark,
wasn't
I want to
aware
run
of.
with that. What you just said. Going back is again a very healthy thing, but what is
Hmm.
not healthy is to go back uh, with a victimhood mentality,
Yeah.
looking to be a victim. I don't know why I'm just some hypersensitive to victims because it is such a poor quality to, in my opinion, if you're a victim, you've given somebody else your power.
Hmm.
So just to start, I don't care who you are or whatever lived experiences you had. I don't care how horrible they are. By labeling yourself as a victim or your group as a victim, you've empowered your enemy or your. I just don't get it. You know,
Your opposition. Yeah, no,
it's
I
such an
think
unattractive.
it's very unattractive. Yeah, no, I think well, you use the phrase you can get bitter or you can get better, and that's where the choice comes in, right? It's like if bitter is
Absolutely.
you go bitter when you start blaming other people and you start blaming other things and you start talking about what your hardship is all. It's like when I talk about my hardship, most of the time I'm laughing, right?
Yeah.
Because, and because a lot of it's fucking funny.
Yeah.
But
Well, you got to. That's number one. I think maybe after self-awareness, being self-aware is you have to be able to laugh at yourself. You have to have some enough self-awareness where it's all it's all bullshit in the end, right?
yeah, it is. I mean, and I think we all walk around, at least you
Yeah,
wrote it down here. The subconscious part of it is there's some things that drive our behavior that we're not even aware of in the moment. And
yeah,
then I think that's where, as well, self-reflection after the fact. Maybe there was a challenging moment, or you didn't get what you want, or you lost an
yeah.
argument, or you lost some money, or whatever. The first thing I try to do is, well, how did that happen?
Yeah.
And what can I do to preclude that from ever happening again? Not
Yeah.
like whose fault is it, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's what doesn't break you, breaks you, makes you.
Yeah, yeah,
And so you could say, "Oh, I'm broken. I'm a victim. This is happening all over the world to every other people." And it's like, no, it actually made you who you are. That adversity is becomes who you are. That's your superpower. That's your secret sauce in life. If you can overcome those obstacles and that adversity makes you. So yeah, I don't. I'm like I said, this whole victimhood, even what's going on down in L.A. Everybody's running around like they're a victim, and that I know what it's. The administration is out. It's like, come on, that there's so many more opportunities for immigrants to come here and work and do things. There's a lot more good stories in that than bad. So yeah, I don't want to get off topic as far as um, the particulars in terms of these riots, but from what I can tell, they're upset that we're enforcing the laws that haven't
yeah.
been enforced in years.
Well, that's everybody in that circle of nonsense. I guess the quote unquote leadership of Southern California is. Yeah, they're not interested in other people's worldviews. They're not interested in other people's belief systems, and I think it was interesting. We were talking about whether this is being done on purpose or being done out of ignorance. Or, I think it's purposeful. I think everything that's happening is purposeful, and I think it's in pursuit of control, and in pursuit of power, and in pursuit of money. And I think you could call those all the same thing, I suppose, but I think that the guy that's in the office of the president now has got a completely different worldview, and I think that one of my favorite things about him is that he didn't come into this as a politician.
Hmm.
He never played that game. His worldview was of a billionaire businessman that's been all over the world, and I
Hmm.
think a lot of that is quite helpful in what he's doing right now. My
Well,
opinion.
it's helpful. It's also quite challenging and a threat to the establishment. Let's just call it what it is, right? Whether that's the Democratic Party, the ideology, the belief system is so different. And I'm
Yes.
not here to debate, which one is right or wrong. Obviously, we have a very strong opinion of what is the right belief system, but that's really what this is. This is the underlining issue. What's going on, and it's not just immigration; it's a lot of things.
Well, you take the police just as a for instance. Like the
Hmm.
way I was raised, my worldview
Yeah,
on the police was those are my friends.
yeah,
Those people protect me. But then when I got out of high school, I discovered that a lot of the guys that went into the police force, their other option was getting arrested for something because they were aggressive and they
Yeah.
like guns and they like the power and all that. So it's a really interesting kind of dichotomy. But
Yeah, so you and I have a belief system that without strong law enforcement, then you don't have I feel this way, you don't have a civilized society. Because if you can have people commit
absolutely.
crimes and steal things with no consequences, then that's not a civilized society. And there's nowhere in the world where people that you can go around and just do whatever they want to do. You know
Well,
that?
and if you don't respect them,
Yeah,
right? On top of that, it's like when you hear if when you hear someone complain about the police, how they might have been treated, I 9 out of 10 times, maybe 10 out of 10 in my experience, it's like, well, what'd you do? You know?
yeah,
And how did you act when you got pulled over? And it's like they crossed the line. That's why they got
yeah,
treated poorly by the cops.
yeah.
You don't fuck with the cops, right? That's what I said to you earlier about these
Just give
people
them
going
respect,
around.
give them what they want.
Give them
Don't
respect.
make their job
Give
difficult. And
everybody respect
but
until they prove to you that they don't deserve it. You
yeah,
know?
that has been my experience. I know others that have had a completely different experience, and I'm sure there's
Absolutely.
bad police departments. And if you're, a different group, you may get treated differently. And it's just it's very concerning to me that we have such a breakdown in the system. And again, it's hard to know where the truth lies, right in the middle of that. But if you have a sitting mayor and a sitting governor that is outright, I guess you could say breaking the law, or they don't want to enforce the federal laws because
Right.
they have a belief system that doesn't feel that we should enforce our immigration system, or because it hasn't been for so many years, and then not to cooperate with our federal government. If you don't have uh, rules and laws, then you don't have a civilized society, and
No, it's called anarchy. It doesn't work. It
it
never
never
has.
works.
And that's
Yeah,
how we bring history back in. You got just go back and check out every single civilization that fell, which is like all of them
that's
except us right now.
that's right.
Like,
Yeah,
it's just because of that was part of the initial breakdown, the
yeah,
no respect for the law. And it became
yeah,
everything's okay. All that behavior is okay, whatever, everything's okay. You can do anything you want. It's like, no, I'm not talking about a libertarian view where you just let people do whatever they want. You got to add that last part in, which is as long as you don't hurt anyone else, right?
yeah, yeah,
So, but yeah, I think the worldview, the most important thing that I've heard us talking about, in my opinion, on the topic of worldview is the revisiting of your worldview. Like, why do I think the way that I do? Where did that come from? And might I be better served as well? Maybe the world might be better served if I reflected on thinking about that a little bit differently.
yeah.
I,
I'll wrap up with this story because you wanted to hear kind of the insight, but this is a very good friend of mine, super smart guy. We go back years, and we spent the day together. We had a great time, and the conversation came up because we were in San Francisco about homelessness,
mhm,
and this is a heated issue because it's in certain parts. The part we were at, San Francisco, was beautiful. I mean, it was really really nice. The restaurants were full. It couldn't be more thriving, right? But uh, a half a mile away was the Tenderloin, where it's disgusting. Like you said, it's like a bad movie. You never could think this could ever happen in our country,
mhm,
but it's a
mhm.
real thing. And we're actually driving around one of those driverless cars, those Waymos.
Yep, yep.
So it was kind of fun. So we could say and do everything. We were having a good time, and it came up about the homelessness, and we started off kind of not arguing, but in our different positions, but when it was done, we were 100% agreement. If you cared at all about, if you had any care for another human, you would never let them get to the point where they were living in those conditions, doing
Mhm,
drugs in the open air, basically shitting themselves. Like, how could you have any compassion for a human being if you were to let that happen? And that was policy. That was a
mhm,
group of politicians
mhm.
that let that happen, and they
Yeah.
continue to. So yes, that's a belief system, and it's an ideology somehow. It's frightening to think that if you all care about a human, why would you let it go to those conditions? And then in the end, we completely agreed this is unacceptable. And if we really cared about them, then we would have laws that we enforce, the simple
Well, I think,
laws
yeah, no, I
of
think that
of
absolutely. I mean, I
pissing
don't.
in the street, or and they need to be arrested and taken to a place and then provided a facility that they can at least get better. And if they
It's
don't want to do that, then they shouldn't be allowed to go back and act as a citizen and break laws all day long.
Well,
It's
there's this real interesting confusion around the word compassion
yeah,
and accountability. And all we're doing in my mind right now is we're reaching out to hold the people in Los Angeles that are misbehaving accountable for their behavior.
yeah,
And because they've been allowed to get away with things for an entire term, arguably more, 4, 5,
yeah.
6 years, whatever, and you throw COVID in there and you throw social media and artificial,
Mhm.
you throw all these things in this cauldron. It's like that's why everyone that's being held accountable is mad because we let them get away with it for a while and they thought they would continue to get away with it.
Mhm.
And so the madness is not is it's not associated properly. So it's like, oh, well, what about all the little kids that are getting separated from their parents? I'm like, if a cop goes to a U.S. home and there's domestic violence going on, the first thing they do is they take the kid and get them into a
Mhm.
safe place. So don't give
Yeah.
me this shit about taking kids away. If your dad and mom are doing illegal stuff, the cops take the kids away all the time. Drunk driving, same
Mhm.
thing. Domestic violence, same thing. Firearm in the house, same. They get the kid out of there. They get the kid to safety. So,
Mhm.
they were allowed to get away with bad behavior for a long time, and they just felt like they could keep doing it. So,
So
as,
one last question for before we wrap this up, Mark.
yeah,
At the end of the day, it is still somewhat of a democracy in that we have a vote. The people, I'm just going to pick on San Francisco because that's where we're at, right? And the people in San Francisco voted for the same leaders decade after decade. Right now, we're going on close to 40 years of the
yep,
same leadership that, without a shadow of a doubt, you could say uh, we're part of the problem, have not fixed the problem. The problem continues to get worse. So,
hmm,
is it the public's you get what you deserve because they continue to vote them in, or are the politicians so clever that they have manipulated the system to stay in power? And at the
yeah,
end of the
I
day, it is a
yeah,
vote. It is a vote.
yeah. I
They
think
elected
that.
those leaders to allow that policy to continue on to get to the point we're at right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know the answer to that. It'd be a real good topic to delve into with a little bit of research. What I'm thinking of, kind of to wrap up as well, is that one of the most interesting things about our perspectives, our worldviews, is I live in Florida and you live in California,
Yeah,
and everything you said, none of that's happening in Florida. And
yeah,
so I think that means that it's possible. Why did we put the guy that we put in office as a governor here? Because there were things happening here that people didn't like,
yep.
and they wanted to put a stop to them. So yeah, and then you've always said, is any one vote going to do anything for anybody? And I just think the flaw in that logic is obviously that if everyone thought that way, nobody would vote. So you do, I think, and I know you believe this, that voting is important,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, it's a big question. And like I said to you in the pregame, I think in another 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to have some conclusive evidence of where this is going, and I am hopeful, but I'm going to continue to assess my worldview because I find that exercise of self reflection very helpful,
Yeah.
as well for my own peace of mind. You know,
Right. But to live on to leave on a positive note, because I do think you, like anything, the glass could be half full or half empty. It's
right?
really how you want to look at it. One could look at this and say this is disaster. The system is breaking down. This is the end of a civilization, a
Mhm.
civilized society. Or you could say the system is working as it's designed. This is what progress looks like. I said this about COVID. COVID was a real challenge in terms of the system, and you could say it worked out as it was designed because states, the red states, didn't buy into this belief system, and they didn't go all in on lockdowns and a lot of other things, right? And they're doing pretty darn well right now in comparison to the blue states. So the system worked. You could say the system worked as it was designed,
Yeah, and I
because
think
it
that
had autonomy and was separated.
uh,
You could also say right now that the system is being challenged, but maybe it is working, and that the federal government had separate authority. It was designed this way.
mhm.
So yeah, I'd like to see that this maybe is what progress looks like,
Yeah.
and that you
Yeah, no, I think I'm optimistic at the risk of sounding naive.
know,
But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Thanks, Jim.
All right, Mark. Till
All
next
right.
week.
Next week. See you.